Welcome. I'm Susan Barashai, founder of C Admissions, and you may be 6 to 10 years into your career, and it may feel like business school, it's going to be an inevitable thing that you have to do. But you may be stuck with a question of, do I walk away from my job for 2 years or try to do this whole thing while working? This is a really hard question to answer because logistics and everything else is and life is complicated, right? And it's hard also because you're asked to choose who you're becoming now. And most people really don't have the framework to think about that clarity. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's dive right in. We're comparing EMBA with an MBA. Which one should you really be choosing that makes sense for you? So let's start with the lie that keeps people stuck. One of those is they're basically the same thing. EMBA is just a part-time version of the full-time experience. Pick the best ranked school you can get into and just apply. All of these things sound logical, but it's really not the way I suggest that you think about it. These programs are not the different versions of this or different schedule of the same thing, of the same product. They deliver opposite outcomes for people at opposite career inflection points. Full-time MBAs, or a full-time MBA program is built for people who need to change what they're doing. And we'll talk more about what that actually means. And an EMBA is built for people who need to accelerate what they are already doing. Treating them as interchangeable is definitely how you can make huge mistakes that not only cost money, but also obviously time as well in this process. So for example, a consultant making $200,000 does an MBA because they can't imagine stepping away, spend 2 years in weekend classes, then tries to break into tech at 35. They're competing with the 28-year-old who had a full-time MBA recruiting infrastructure that is built into that full-time MBA experience behind them. Or maybe the senior manager who doesn't need to switch careers gives up 2 years of salary and promotion momentum for a full-time MBA, sits through recruiting events for industries that are not any better, at least for them, than what they've had, when they could have gone to executive development program that an EMBA offers while staying in their role. This isn't really about one path being better than the other. It's about choosing the path that actually is engineered for what you personally need, as it relates, of course, to where you're going in your goals. So it's really important to not be bogged down by, my friend said this, my other friend said this other thing. It's really about you and your personal journey. So let's talk through each one separately. So the full-time MBA is for those who are looking for career transformation. This could be switching industries, so consultant to tech, finance to startup, engineers to strategy, changing functions, so maybe operations to general management, individual contributors to moving into a leadership track. The infrastructure of a full-time MBA exists to make those pivots possible. On-campus recruiting brings oftentimes 200 plus companies directly to you, specifically hiring individuals like yourself who are MBA full-time students for roles that career switchers can definitely access. The 2-year format gives you a summer internship, typically about 10 to 12 weeks to test a new industry, make mistakes along the way, get real feedback, and decide if this is actually what you want before you fully commit. If it's not what you want, if it ended up being, I thought this was going to be greater than it was, you have a second year to recalibrate and pivot into something else. And your cohort is full of other people just like you in that transition. Everyone's starting over together. That matters when you're building a network in fields you don't have a history in. And individuals who are part of your cohort are actually individuals who have had exposure. What a full-time MBA is not designed for is staying in your current situation to get, meaning to get better at what you are currently doing. So if you are an analyst, going back to an analyst role after an MBA, you can do that. So consultants who stay in consulting, tech people who stay in tech. But if that's your goal, you're giving up 2 years of salary, 2 years of advancement, and paying also $200,000 in, a degree for a recruiting infrastructure and everything else, of course, that an MBA offers that you may not necessarily need. And that's not automatically a bad decision, but the opportunity cost is real, and you need to definitely be clear-eyed when you're making this decision to go down this route. Now, the EMBA is engineered for leadership acceleration. You're staying in your current domain, so that's finance, operations, technology, family business, and you need to develop strategic thinking at the enterprise level, moving from how do I execute this project to how do all the pieces of business fit together, and how do I make decisions that affect organizational direction. The infrastructure reflects this in the program, right? So the part-time format means you are continuously earning, you keep career momentum, you stay visible in your organization. The cohort is also other executives just like you who are managing real scope. So they have teams, budgets, P&Ls, and all sorts of other responsibilities. Curriculum assumes you already know how business works operationally. It's teaching you strategic frameworks for problems you're facing right now. And critically, there is a career service, but there's not the infrastructure the same way that a full-time MBA program. So there's not going to necessarily be, the full recruiting cycle that a full-time MBA experience has. Also, you will not have a summer internship. Why? Because, of course, the program assumes you are not switching careers. You are accelerating into the one that you already have. Can you pivot careers with an EMBA? Absolutely. I've had many clients that do this exact thing, but you're doing it without the recruiting infrastructure, without the summer internship to test the waters, without the 2-year buffer to make mistakes and realign. The EMBA career switch is self-directed, and obviously when it's self-directed is a little bit harder. But if you know you need to switch industries, especially if you're a 6 to 10 year work experience, choosing an EMBA to avoid leaving your job is definitely choosing for long-term pain in this process. So I would really look at what exactly are you looking to do long-term before you make these decisions. So this distinction is definitely fundamentally should change how you should think about your competitiveness also, because admission committees are asking different questions for the two programs. So the full-time program, the admission committee asks, is this person ready to transform? They want to see trajectory worth betting on. So your capacity to leverage the 2-year immersion that you will have in a residential program, like a full-time MBA. They want to see evidence that you'll contribute to a diverse, your diverse perspective to a cohort who's also diverse. And they're looking for career momentum, clarity about your next move, and proof that you can handle the rigor of making this significant change. And it is quite a significant change. For the EMBA, the admission committee asks, is this person already leading? They want to see current organizational impact. you managing your teams, you are making decisions that affect business outcomes. You're operating at a level where strategic frameworks are immediately applicable to the work that you're doing day in and day out. They're looking for that senior perspective, executive presence, readiness to contribute to cohort discussions where everyone's dealing with real enterprise level problems. This is why the same person can be an incredibly strong candidate for one path and completely wrong for the other path. So a 28-year-old with 6 years of experience, great trajectory, ready to pivot from consulting to tech, is perfect for a full-time MBA program. Probably is going to be, and if they're considering an EMBA, they're going to be a little bit too junior for an EMBA program, where the average for an EMBA program, it's about 35 years old, and everyone is coming in with like 10 to 15, or sometimes even more years of work experience. But a 38-year-old senior director with 15 years of experience managing a 50 million budget and a team of 30 is perfect for the EMBA. Definitely overqualified for the full-time MBA program, where they'd be sitting in a class of 27-year-olds, and the recruiting apparatus is designed for career switchers. What's important for you as you're making this decision and calibrating which one of these programs makes sense for you, your job should be to first understand what each program is actually evaluating. And that's also going to change everything, about you being competitive for either program. And how you position yourself, obviously, is going to be dependent on the program that you are applying. When we work with someone who is applying for a full-time MBA, it's different framing than for someone who we're helping in an EMBA. So how do you make this decision? So we're going to give you a framework. Choose the full-time MBA program if you can honestly answer yes to these questions. I need to switch industries or functions. Not, it would be interesting to explore. This is, not the best way to spend your money. Second thing is I can afford to step away financially and psychologically for 2 years. I can handle the foregone salary, the tuition costs, and the reality of watching peers advance while I'm in school. Or maybe you have peers who are already in business school, so this makes a lot of sense for you. Other thing is you should be able to say yes to, I want a structured recruiting infrastructure, doing the heavy lifting for you, bringing companies to me, organizing interviews, organizing treks, providing coaching in terms of what do I need to do, and also that you're ready to start over with a cohort that's also in transition like yourself. Which means also that you're okay with being the most senior person in the room, especially if you're over the age range of a candidate who is applying to a full-time program. Choose the EMBA if you can answer yes to these questions. I want to accelerate my current path, not switch out of it. I have management responsibilities and senior scope already. So you're managing team, budget, you make consequential decisions. I can't or won't leave my role because of financial constraints or family obligations or the nature of my business, or this is my family business, whatever those circumstances are specific to you. And I can self-direct my career development without the recruiting apparatus that a full-time MBA offers. I'm comfortable taking ownership of doing a lot of the networking, and we've had many clients do that, be able to transition to careers, to industries that often are deemed impossible, but they had that sort of energy that is required to be able to make those moves. So now here's what may be happening at the moment. You may be answering yes to both of these. And that means that you are in a gray zone. And that's when you need to think carefully about which factors are going to matter most to you and which path gets you closer to where you're trying to go. Definitely a coach can help you navigate this process, but obviously, ultimately, it is your decision in terms of where you go. But these are important questions that you need to clarify before you invest time on your GMAT, before you invest time on your executive assessment or anything else that you will be doing. So I want to give you 2 real examples where the decision wasn't quite straightforward. So client A was 8 years into tech, making about 300K, managing a very large team. She wanted the credentials and network of the MBA, but it was very clear to her she did not want to leave her high-paying role, and she did not need to switch industries. She really liked what she was doing. She liked the company, and she was in the tech space. So for her, an EMBA was obviously the right choice. She applied to 3 programs, got admitted to all 3, chose Wharton's EMBA program to attend. That decision was right for her because she had clarity about her objectives and chose a program designed to deliver them for her. She wasn't looking to change what she was doing. She really needed those strategic decisions because her role was getting more complex and more complex in an enterprise level kind of decision making. So the EMBA was absolutely perfect for her. Client B was living in South Africa, had a senior leadership role, couldn't relocate his entire family for 2 years. He chose Wharton's global EMBA program. What was valuable is that afterward, he was very honest with me about the trade-offs. The global MBA is not the same as being on campus or near campus for traditional EMBA. You get fewer spontaneous networking opportunities, less access to on-campus recruiting events, different relationship depth with your cohort because you're only together for intensive modules rather than every weekend or every other weekend. Was it still worth it? Absolutely. But he went in understanding what he was trading in the decisions that he was making. The point here is that both these clients made the right decisions for them, but the right decision requires clarity about what they were trying to accomplish, honest assessment of their constraints, and understanding of what each program path actually delivers versus what it doesn't, and how does it align with what you're trying to do. So let's talk about ROI, because this is where people get stuck in the wrong calculation. The simple math is full-time MBA costs roughly $250,000 plus about $300,000 if that's kind of what you're making of foregone salary. This is an estimate. Please don't come for me for these numbers. It's just a rough estimate. Whatever you are making, that's times that by 2. An EMBA costs roughly about $200,000 in tuition. Your employer might sponsor part of it, maybe all of it if you're lucky, and you keep earning your salary. So on paper, EMBA look obviously better financially, but that's not the real calculation, and I see this way too often. What does your career look like in 10 years if you make the right choice for your objective versus the wrong choice for your objective? That's the delta that you have to be calculating. If you need to switch industries and you chose an EMBA because it's quote unquote cheaper, you might spend the next 5 years struggling to break into your target field without the recruiting infrastructure, without the internship credentials, without a network of peers in that industry. You saved however much you saved in that short term, but you cost yourself potentially millions in career earnings because you're now 35, 40, competing with 28-year-olds who have the recruiting stamp of approval from full-time programs, the network, the relationships, the conversations that happen day in and day out as part of a residential program. If you don't need to switch careers and you chose a full-time MBA anyway, you gave up 2 years of advancement. Maybe you'd be a VP by now, but instead you are re-entering at the same level you left. You spent $500,000+ for recruiting services you didn't necessarily need, and classroom learning you could have gotten while continuing to earn and also advance in your career. The ROI that matters is not the tuition versus salary, it's the trajectory of where you're heading. Getting the right development at the right moment in your career has a compounding return over decades. It's not something you calculate what you will get immediately post a degree. So making the wrong choice doesn't just cost you money, it's definitely going to cost you momentum. And momentum in your 30s and 40s is definitely very different than momentum in earlier years. So on timing, at 6 to 7 years into your career, both paths technically are available to you. At 8 to 10 years, both are still open, but the decision really depends on the objectives, and the window is very much closing. At 11 to 13 years, an EMBA is becoming your primary path in most situations. Full-time programs start questioning fit. Are you going to learn from your peers who are so much younger than you? At 14 plus years of work experience, an EMBA is almost certainly your only reality option or realistic option at the moment. And the question here is, where are you in this window, in this timeline? And what are you thinking between the two? So figuring out MBA versus EMBA is only step one. Once you know which path makes sense, then you need school selection based on what you're actually trying to accomplish. Not just ranking, but which specific programs align with your industry, your program, and your goals. You need positioning that reflects your readiness for that program type. So if you're younger and applying for an EMBA, you have to really communicate your leadership. If you are older and applying for MBA, you need to essentially showcase how an MBA is going to be supportive, a full-time MBA is going to be supportive despite your peer group being much younger with many years less work experience than you. You need a narrative that connects your past experiences to what you want to do next in a way that's both authentic to you and compelling, of course, to the admission committee. And you need, obviously, an execution that's rigorous enough to compete at the highest level, given that you are competing with, the best of the best in terms, especially if you're applying to M7s and top 10 to 20 programs. A lot of candidates definitely struggle in this process, not because they're not smart or accomplished. Obviously, they are. They wouldn't be considering a top MBA program if they were not. But they struggle because translating career experiences into application narrative that the admission committee recognizes and rewards with admission requires definitely a different way of thinking about your positioning, understanding the admission lens, and that rigorous iteration of multiple layers on the execution of that narrative. What we do here at SIA Admissions, if you're new, especially to our channel, we work with a limited number of clients per cycle, specifically because this level of work requires a deep partnership. It's not just how do I find the story and then write about it. It's much more layered than that. And if you want to schedule a consultation, we can discuss the options for you. Your current role, trajectory, clarify whether an MBA or an EMBA aligns with your objectives, and determine how we can work together in a way that makes sense. Now, we're going to open the floor to questions. We have about 6 minutes left. So please ask any questions that you have about your journey, where you are now. So whether you are taking the tests, whether you are in this entire just started this process, wherever you are. Hello. Thank you. All right, I don't see a question yet. So please write the question and comment of wherever you're joining us from. And we're gonna go with some questions that came through the registration to begin. How do I measure the strength of an EMBA network in a concrete way? This requires a lot of conversations. The people who you should have a lot of conversations with should be individuals who are in that program or have been in that program in the past, maybe let's say 2 to 5 years. And what I mean by that is obviously current students who are going through this experience. You can get a sense of the engagement. What does it look like? Are individuals actually leveraging their network? Alumni, what does the experience look like? And then with alumni, you get a sense of seeing, especially if they've been 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years out of the degree, out of the program, you can really stress test how have they been continuing to leverage the opportunities that they received there, continuing to leverage the network after to progress in their career. So this requires a lot of conversations, and you definitely want to time it right. We are in December right now, so obviously it's a holiday. It's probably going to be a little bit more challenging to actually have conversations with individuals just because people are wrapping up, preparing for holidays. If they're in school, they're having exams, etc. But timing in terms of when you actually should have conversations with individuals, that means you should really have those conversations early in your school selection process before you commit to, I want to apply to X school, so that you really get a sense of what that network is going to look like for you. And you want to have multiple conversations, not just one, because you can't make a life-altering decision based on one person's perspective or experience. How do I judge if my current leadership exposure is strong enough to compete in EMBA pools? Well, you want to see first and foremost, how long have you been a leader? Actually, those are some of the questions that they ask you in the EMBA application portal. So you would want to start looking at that, then looking at the kind of impact and the kind of involvement that you have had so far. Have you been involved with the leadership, upper management, in the context of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? And from there, obviously, brand recognition, so all the sort of things that you expect, to fill the classrooms of top M7 programs, you would want to somewhat replicate. That does not mean that if you don't have a brand recognized institution that you can't get in. We worked with candidates who have small family business outside of the United States, so that is not an element that is going to be detracting of you, but you definitely want to understand what your leadership has been, what kind of transformation have you initiated, and do you communicate, or at least in your mind until you start the writing process, the caliber of someone who is on the pathway to a C-suite, right? And of course, we are definitely happy to have a conversation to talk about what your experiences look like, and are you someone who would be qualified for an EMBA in terms of, or you become competitive rather. Okay, so there's a question in the chat. I'm just going to read it out loud. It says, how do you hope to get into a credible US business school to switch careers with a full-time MBA when you believe that there'll be apprehensions in the minds of different AdCom with the higher age and experience? Okay, so if you're applying to a full-time MBA program and you are older, and this depends a little bit how old you are, and it also depends on which programs you are applying to. Some programs are very adamant that they have different tiers of engagement in terms of who should apply to a full-time MBA, who should apply to a sort of a middle management kind of MBA, who should apply to EMBA. And for that one, I'm thinking more like the Sloan Fellows program. MIT so has its full-time MBA, the Sloan Fellows, the EMBA. So there's like this tiers of candidate pool. And if you have more years of work experience, your job is to be able to communicate to the admission team. Why do you need a full-time MBA versus an executive MBA or a Sloan Fellows MBA, right? A Sloan Fellows MBA is a full-time program, So if you're an international candidate, that's a great way to get to the United States, have a residential experience, and be able to make a pivot. And if you choose the full-time MBA program, you will need to be able to communicate the elements that you don't currently have that a full-time MBA is going to be able to offer you. Not just the recruiting component, but most of the learnings in business school happens through your peers. And what are you going to be able to learn from your peers? How will your peers will probably learn more from you than you will from them, but you have to convince the admission team that they would be able to, that you will be able to learn from them as well. All right, I think we're done with our time today. This evening, if you are curious about that 70% of what is evaluated in a business school candidate, so an MBA candidate, not the quantitative data, so not the stats of your GMAT or the GRE, but you really want to see how they're evaluating and assessing your candidacy, join me on GMAC tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you go to our events page on our website, you will see that there is a registration. Register for the event. It's going to be on Zoom, so you won't be able to find it on YouTube, so you have to register and then join us tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time to discuss that in more detail. Excellent. I will see you next week, and have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend. Hi, I'm Susan Barashai, founder of C Admissions. If you'd like to go deeper into MBA strategy, watch the next video here. And if you want more insights on building a standout application, click here to subscribe.